This is a 1932 Ford Roadster. It's built in the theme of what people would build back in 1950. So when they came back after the war, people were building hot rods and they were enthralled with speed and going out to Bonneville and doing things. So it's a 32 Ford Roadster, but it's got a 1949 flathead V8 in it. It's got a 1939 Lincoln 3-speed transmission and a 1939 Ford rear end in it. And it runs on propane, which is something unique and different. Propane is a green fuel. It's been a clean air fuel since back in the Clean Air Act in the 1970s. And we just enjoy driving it. It's good for the environment. It doesn't pollute. It's different. Get a lot of questions about it and so forth. And today, we're going to put it on renewable propane, which comes from camelina and animal waste products. And it's, you know, it's really a cool thing. Propane actually has a slightly higher octane than gasoline. I don't notice a lot of difference in the power, but what I do notice is it's smoother. The engine itself is the same as it would be for gasoline. What you change is the fuel system on it. So it's kind of what you call the top of the engine. You know, where people have fuel injection or carburetors and things like that, that's the fuel side, and we changed that. So that's the only thing, and we had to create it because in 1949 they didn't make a system like this. Right. You know.
While you're getting settled, I guess I should tell you just a quick tad about me. My name's Judy Taranovich. I took over ownership of Procter Gas back in 2010 when my husband passed away, and we've been running the company with an amazing team ever since. I'm born and raised in Vermont. I'm not going to tell you I've lived here all my life yet. I hope that'll be a later message. I moved 6 miles west to Proctor from growing up in Rutland. And as a kid, I envisioned training horses for a living. God had a sense of humor. I was horrible in math and science, and here I am. So, but I love what I do. I love our industry. I feel we have a wonderful story to tell, and that we're a very important part of our energy structure here in Vermont. With all that said, I am going to turn it over to guest speakers who are much more capable than I am, and it's said that the mind can only retain what the seat can endure, so I'm not going to leave you sitting too long. Let's see. We're going to switch it up a little bit because my first guest speaker, who's Matt Cota, the head of the Vermont Fuel Dealers, is stuck on Route 7. So anybody that's been traveling Route 7, he's sitting there thinking he should be here. Leslie Anderson is our president and CEO of the Propane Gas Association of New England. Leslie has worked in the propane regulatory compliance industry for over 25 years, having served as Director of Risk Management and Corporate Counsel for Dead River Company and Bureau Director for the Maine Department of Environmental Protection. Leslie is a graduate of the University of Texas, and she holds a master's degree in environmental management from the University of Houston and a law degree from the South Texas College of Law. I'm pretty sure that's the president. Call him. Tell him he's going to have to wait till I'm done. Leslie is active with the National Propane Gas Association and the Energy Marketers Association in Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont. So needless to say, she has had a busy year this year. Leslie, please.
All right, I can't put it on there. I'll turn it off. Thank you. Did you turn it off? Okay. Because she doesn't want me to speak. Thank you so much, Judy. It's great to be here. As she said, my name's Leslie Anderson. I run the Propane Gas Association of New England. We're a regional trade association for alternative energy, which propane is an alternative energy. And we operate in the 6 New England states that are here. And many of my members are companies just like Judy, small family-owned local companies with grassroots right in their communities that have been providing propane to their customers throughout the New England area. So if you heard my background, I am an environmentalist, and people sometimes ask me, what are you doing working for a company that sells propane? Well, propane itself, I believe, has an important role to play in cleaning up our environment and making climate change slow down and not be as aggressive as it is. The reason that I think that is because propane is a beneficial byproduct. It gets locked in a lot of times with fossil fuels, but up until really the 50s, propane wasn't even used for heating. It was flared off. It was what was left over that no one used. It evaporated into the air. And today, the majority of propane, all the propane pretty much that we use here in Vermont, comes from natural gas processing. There's so much natural gas that's produced around the world every year that there's a propane left over in the amount between usually 3 to 6% from the natural gas. But that 3 to 6%, it's not all used. Every year, propane is wasted and it's just burned off, either at the place where the natural gas is made or out where it's produced and comes from. So if you're using propane yourself in your home, you are helping to reuse a beneficial byproduct that's otherwise going to be wasted. So you're reducing carbon emissions from another energy source by using propane yourself in your home. And so I've always thought that propane is really important for that reason, to lower our carbon emissions, but also because we need something that's reliable and is going to provide energy security. And when you think about energy security, what happens when the power goes out? I came to New England because I spent a semester just down the road at the Vermont Law School one summer as a visiting student when I was going to school in Texas. And it was the most glorious summer I ever spent in my life. I had been living in Houston, which is the equivalent of a sauna, if you're not aware of what it's like in Houston. And I came up to Vermont, and I didn't realize that you could play volleyball outside and not break a sweat. And I don't think I sweat the entire summer that I was here my first year. I've acclimated. That was back in 1999. And now I'm finding myself a little damp today, even though this is very cool weather by Texas standards. But Vermont was so beautiful that I really fell in love with New England. And I also visited a semester at the University of Maine Law School before I went back and completed my degree. And then when I graduated, I came up here and I converted from barrels to gallons, and I worked in the energy business up here. And I have always been in charge of environmental compliance, safety, training, and trying to make sure that our employees are safe, our customers are safe, and that we have a clean product that's out there. And today is extremely exciting because we have got the first load of renewable propane coming into Vermont ever that's out there. Renewable propane is new. It's a new innovation that's only been around for about 4 or 5 years, and it's being produced now in quantities great enough that that entire yellow transport that's out there is filled with renewable propane. And what is renewable propane? Propane itself is C3H8, which is carbon and hydrogen. Renewable propane is made from renewable sources. So you take today to make it renewable sources such as use cooking oils, use soybean oils, camelina plants, which is a crop cover that's used and then can be produced into renewable propane. And when you convert those items into renewable propane, you get a very low carbon intensity for it. So it's taking carbon that exists out there that we're going to throw away, either in our landfill, where the cooking oil goes, or from biomass, or from the plants, that are going to be just just discarded, you take those, you capture the carbon in those, and you convert it into renewable propane. And that's going to be very good for the environment. And here in Vermont, it's going to make us competitive with electricity, because you guys live in the cleanest state in the United States in terms of electricity. You have a carbon intensity of 2.9 here in Vermont because the majority of your power comes from hydropower, which is extremely clean. The rest of the country averages 140 for their carbon intensity. And that's because we still have about 40% of our power in the United States coming from coal. And then the other bulk of that power comes from natural gas. Here in New England, 3 of my states have twice the carbon intensity of propane. So using propane in those homes, even conventional propane that's not renewable, is much cleaner for the environment than it would be if they were using electricity. But here in Vermont, we've got very clean electricity. So if we look at propane and we clean it up by adding renewable propane to it, and then we add blends of other renewables, such as DME, which is called dimethyl ether, and it's produced from dairy wastes and from other wastes. So if we went down to Ben & Jerry's and we went to the place where all the cows are, and we captured the cow waste and the cow manure that's used to make the ice cream down there, and we put it in an anaerobic digester, which is like a big cooking pot, and we captured from that the gases that came off, we could get DME, which can be mixed with propane, which could actually provide a negative carbon intensity for propane, which means it would be cleaner than the electricity. That's not happening yet, but that's where we're going, and that's the innovation that's coming to our industry. So it's really exciting to see this truck out here filled with renewable propane, which is all coming from reused byproducts and waste products that are out there, here in Vermont, with a low carbon intensity compared to what we're using currently. Even though propane itself is extremely clean burning. And it's also, as I said, made up of carbon and hydrogen, so it's not toxic. If it is released, it dissipates in the air, and it does not have any greenhouse gases. Unlike natural gas, which is methane, one of the most potent greenhouse gases, 24 times more potent than CO2. The propane doesn't have any methane. So it's very clean burning. And it needs to be part of the energy solution. We can't put all of our eggs in one basket with wind and with solar. There's not enough space. There's not enough sun up here for us to have that 100%. So we have hydropower, another clean energy, right? But we need a backup for our electric grid. And propane's the perfect backup. If the electricity goes out in Vermont, what powers the cell phone towers? Propane. There's a propane tank on every little mountaintop at the bottom of those cell phone towers that turns on when the power goes out, that allows the police and the ambulances and the EMS to make sure they can still serve their population when we don't have power. Propane has backups at hospitals throughout the state, because you need a backup that's clean and reliable for when we don't have electricity. And we don't want to go all electric, because that puts the most vulnerable people we have at risk. My mother-in-law has oxygen that she has to use, and she has a system where she has to plug into electricity to have that. And they installed a propane generator at their house 5 years ago. Judy delivers to propane generators all over the greater Rutland-Proctor area here. And she knows who has medical issues and needs to make sure that their propane generators don't run out, because she's a local company and she knows her community and she's involved in her community. And it's important that we keep businesses like Judy's alive and well here, so that we do work together in times of emergency and we can help each other that are out there. A lot of times people ask me, what is your product doing to help save the environment and to fight climate change? And around the world, propane is being used to replace solid fuels. You know, about half the population of the earth in India and China and Africa does not have electricity. They have solid fuels that they use: wood, animal dung, coal. This is what they use to cook their meals, to heat their homes, to feed their families. And there's a program that we support called Cooking for Life, which provides propane tanks and propane stoves to these people, so that when they're cooking in a room that's probably half the size of this tent that we're in, that doesn't have a chimney, that they can use propane that's clean burning instead of having all this secondhand smoke and everything else that's in the way there. And we've been working with governments to do that. In India, they're moving 3 million people a year from solid fuels to propane, and it's reduced in those 3 years more carbon emissions the entire state of Vermont produces in a year. Just in that one country. And there's other countries that are jumping on as well for that. So around the world, we're working to really combat carbon emissions by replacing these dirtier fuels with the clean burning propane. And it's portable. You can get it there. They deliver propane for cooking around the world on bicycles, mules, motorcycles, backpacks. I mean, people can transport a tank about the size of a barbecue tank, or a tank the size of the one Jim has here in his Roadster that's running on propane, and will be the first Roadster ever to run on renewable propane this afternoon when we get it fueled up. They can take that and they can use it for cooking. And we do that here in America too. When we have hurricanes, when we have floods, people can still boil water by using their propane grills that they have outside and cooking on those that they do. You know, when I go out on the boat in the summertime, we have a propane grill that we take out for our hamburgers and our hot dogs. When you have people go on the Appalachian Trail, they've got their propane that they're cooking on when they're out there. It's portable. It's blessed by chemistry, to quote and steal a line from Tucker Perkins, who you're going to hear from in a minute here. But propane is blessed by chemistry to, you can put a lot of energy into a small container. And we have strong steel containers like the ones that you see out here. And we're going to have a drawing for one at the end of the talk here to give one away. But you can put a lot of energy into that container. And it's a great backup for solar, for wind, and for other renewables. So I want to thank you all for coming out today. Please take one of our folders. It tells some great stories about how propane is changing the lives of people around the world, how women that used to have to spend 8 hours a day gathering firewood in Africa can now cook on a propane stove in an hour, their meals for the day, and they have 8 hours to get educated, to start a business, to work with their family. You know, it really changes lives around the world. There's some great stories in here, and it reduces deforestation, which is something I know here in the Green Mountain State is near to everyone's heart. But keeping our forests, lands preserved, and our ecosystems where the rainforests are around the world is something that propane plays a role in. So it really has a great story, and I hope that you'll think of it differently after you leave here today. And thank you all so much for the welcome. Judy, do you want me to introduce Matt, or are you going to do it? Okay. Well, that's that global warming that we're fighting off right now. Yeah. Well, let me introduce my colleague, Matt Coda. Matt Coda lives at the State House all through the session and represents businesses like Judy's that is here, and other members that are here from our industry. And he runs the Vermont Fuel Dealer Association and is a tireless advocate for our industry, and really one of the smartest guys out there. So if you haven't met Matt, please say hello to him before he leaves. And I'm glad you made it through the traffic, Matt.
I'll be brief because I ceded my time to Leslie. Did an excellent job covering for me. And yes, despite the prices, people are still traveling Vermont roads, and Route 7 is a busy one. Thank you for being here at this event, and thank you, Judy, for what you've done, not only for your customers, for your employees, but for the people of Vermont. That woman's dedication to representing her people here in Proctor and across the state is second to none, and I appreciate your support as Vice President of the Vermont Fuel Dealers Association. And her message is something that we try to emphasize as much as we can to our friends in the legislature and to the people across Vermont, which is the people that are delivering the energy that keeps you warm, that provides hot water, that provides the fuel for cooking, are the very same people who live in your community, who donate to your Little League team, that go to your local churches, that participate. These aren't some out-of-state Texas oilmen. These are men and women who live in here in Vermont, who deliver a vital energy product to the people who live here. And there is another sentiment out there. We know this. Reduce carbon, reduce energy consumption, and we understand that. And we are part of that solution. And whenever I talk to the legislature, talk to community groups, Rotary clubs, chambers of commerce, I always emphasize that. We're not in the business to selling more fuel to every single customer. We're in the business of selling less fuel to more customers. It's our goal to improve the way you heat your home, to make it more efficient, to make it less environmentally damaging. But there is a movement in New Jersey, in New York, in Vermont, in Maine, in Connecticut, in Massachusetts, and other areas across the state, but especially those areas, that there's a one-size-all-fits solution. It is simply to get power from the sun and wind and water and to electrify our homes and cars. And that is one way. That is one way that you can reduce greenhouse gas emissions here in Vermont and across the state. But it's not the only way, and we know this. We know this because the equipment that we install reduces consumption, reduces CO2. We know that on the heating oil side, when you blend biodiesel, and on the propane side, when you blend renewable propane, we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Vermont. And putting all our eggs in one basket, just relying on electricity from intermittent sources of power, is not a responsible, sustainable, economical solution to our energy crisis. And it's because of Judy, and because of Peter Bourne, and dozens of other small business entrepreneurs across the state of Vermont that are learning how we can help our customers, help the environment, reduce our environmental footprint, but provide a product which works. And that's what we do. So thank you all for being here. And Leslie, should I introduce the man of the hour? All right. Judy. Okay. Thank you for your time.
I want to just take 1 minute to thank everybody who has come and helped put this together today. Matt came down from Montpelier, and I think he had the longest trip trying to get down Route 7. Leslie came from Maine, and Tucker has come from, actually, originally Washington, D.C., but I think a little detour to Kansas City, and yeah, so guys, thank you so much. Jim Blake for bringing that beautiful red vehicle that he brought that runs on the propane. Make sure you guys check that out. Again, don't forget to get your tickets and your giveaways. And it's too hot to leave it out, but we do have cake that I'll be bringing out when everybody's done speaking, and then you'll have an opportunity to visit. Please take this opportunity. Tucker obviously isn't going to make it to Vermont every week, so you know, he's a wealth of knowledge. Make sure you get a moment to introduce yourself, especially our legislature that are going to be making so many important decisions for us this fall. Please make sure you speak to him, and if you have any questions, now's the time to get them answered, because he's much brighter than I am. With that said, Tucker Perkins is President and Chief Executive Officer of the Propane Education and Research Council. He has worked in the Sorry. I'd be reading this off my iPad if it was working. He has worked in the propane industry for 26 years, having served as the Director of Business Development for Energy, Chief Executive Officer for Premier Propane, and the Chief Operating Officer for Columbia Propane, a unit of the Columbian Energy Group. Tucker is also former chairman of the PERC Advisory Committee I'm sorry, can't read my writing. Yeah, Tucker's the head of the Propane Education Research Council. He is probably our foremost expert on anything and everything propane, especially the renewable. The legislature that I've talked to in the past about propane buses, this is your opportunity if you wish to find out more about school buses on propane. Well, Tucker's here. Please speak to him about that. So, okay, Tucker.
Look, I'm already disappointed in myself that I won't be able to stand up to that building, so we'll see how this goes. This is the interactive part of my talk. How many of you know Judy on a personal level? Will you raise your hand? That's awesome. So let me just say, before I say anything else about propane, I would be here to actually raise up Judy as someone that we should all admire with great. And I think I didn't really know the whole story about Judy's family and how she came to this business, and it's even more an amazing story. But let me just say, for those of you who live in this town or near this town, and you might know her as a friend or someone you go to church with, or she supplies your propane, she has been a beacon of light for our industry on a national level, right? She leads so many initiatives around how we work with youth and how we talk to people about propane. She branches out now into just a host of things. And I would be here if I had to ride my bicycle from Washington, D.C. as a show of my admiration for Judy. So I say that again. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's lovely to have strong female leaders anywhere, but when you have them on your own team, it's even better. So I'm going to spend a few moments, because I don't think I can be more eloquent than some of those before me about the value of renewable propane. I'm going to come back to that. Just for a moment, I want you to think, because I know you probably don't know some of this. So this morning, if this was a typical day in the schools, 22,500 school buses powered by propane left their bus station and picked up 1.2 million children across every state in the country to take them to and from school. Something that's been in place now for 15 years and frankly is the most safe, the most affordable way to take children to school. But beyond that, I would call them paratransit, you may call them shuttles, across this country, all 50 states, picking up people on their way to the doctor, onto the way to a convalescent home, something. And irregular routes, cost is so important. Many of them, in fact, most of them now powered by propane because of their environmental benefit and their cost profile. Fleets, and I don't know how many of these you see, but if you know where to look, fleets this morning delivered the mail, delivered water, delivered bread, delivered packages and flowers, and I could go on for about another 50 things that fleets powered by propane delivered to your home and to your community today. If I go a little broader beyond transportation, I could say that we're producing power today across most of the Caribbean, big swaths of Africa that actually have power, and we're doing it in a way that's cost effective and good for the environment. 5 million homes rely on propane across the country for their primary heat source. 50 million homes use propane in some way or another. 1 million farms rely on us every day to be their fuel of choice. For years, we've talked about portable, versatile, affordable, words we don't talk about much anymore, right? Affordable, we kind of let that go away. And we would just say clean, right? Clean, that's enough. We even thought maybe clean meant when you stored it, it didn't hurt your water or your soil. Today, to say clean is no longer good enough. And as Leslie really alluded to, this might be the toughest talk I give in a nation of 50 states because you, in fact, are the cleanest grid in the country. And I think you should take great pride in that. But as a fellow who just got back from talking with the Canadian government about the future of energy, it didn't go unnoticed by me that the Canadian government was quick to say, we're using most of our own Canadian hydroelectric power here now, and less of that we think is going to be flowing into the U.S. over the next couple of years. But clearly, clean has come to mean something that we all need to take into account. Now let me just back up for a second. Clean to a true hard-hearted environmentalist, really they're talking about the climate. They're talking about greenhouse gases and CO2, and we are all in on that metric, right? All heads and eyes are turned on the prize of trying to keep temperature rise inside of 1.5 degrees Celsius, if at all possible. I would tell you, as a person who lives in a community and breathes the air every day, clean and greenhouse gases are but one element. I will never engage in that conversation without talking about the climate, about our health. So now I've brought into this next level, which would be things like oxides of nitrogen that give us all asthma, particulate matter, which gives us cancer, a known carcinogen. And when I travel places like LA, 75% of the children that live in LA suffer from some kind of asthma or asthma-induced problem, right? It's not just about the climate, it's also about our health. And I'm quick to say that all of us are more likely to die from a health cost issue like asthma, bronchitis, COPD, than we probably are going to die from climate change. And then the third part of that, the climate, greenhouse gases, health, and then lastly, it has to be affordable, right? I'll talk a little bit in a moment about equity. That's the word we use in DC, and it can have such broad connotations. But it has to be good for the earth. It has to be good for your health. But yet you have to be able to afford the solutions. If you can't afford the solutions, why are we even talking about it, right? And I'm always interested, and when I come to a place like this, it is naturally beautiful to the eye, and it's just so clean and pristine, and you've done such a good job keeping your state where it is. I'm always reminded of one of the great minds for me in this business, Scott Tinker, that is a University of Texas professor, but he has the most famous statement, which says, the earth has one atmosphere and a very efficient conveyor belt, which really translates to, it is great to think locally and be proud and protective of what you have here locally, but we also have to be so mindful of what's going on in the Caribbean, what's going on in Russia, what's going on in China, because we're ultimately breathing their air and reaping their choices as well. So let me go back to this. When we talk about clean, you hear a lot of people say the only path to a clean climate is through electrification. The only path to a clean climate is through electrification. And I would say for many of you who perhaps either have visited Texas or you saw the news around Winter Storm Uri, or you yourself have been the recipient of a downed power line through no fault of the power company, but because of snow and ice and wind or whatever natural disaster, you probably know better that we need to have a wider path. And I'm quick to say that the only path to a clean climate is not through electrification. It is certainly one choice and a good choice, but the best path is the widest path. I often talk about there is no silver bullet, there's only silver buckshot, right? We need more and more choices, and propane is one of those choices. Now, Leslie said it well, propane is cleaner than electricity in 38 states. I'm happy to say that, but I'm also here to say that's not good enough, right? If we really want to be a part of this energy economy, and by the way, you hear often on the news, people talk about the transition to a cleaner climate. I was coming up last week as I started my week going to Kansas City to speak to a group. I heard a really well-known financial pundit say, this is the largest transition since we started talking about the internet. This is the largest change in our lives since the internet was invented. And he kept using the word transition. Well, let me assure you, transition to me always implies smooth. And you just hardly knew you went from one thing to the other. This is not a transition. This is an energy transformation. This transformation is lumpy. It is bumpy. People will lose their jobs. People will be shut out in the cold. People will not be able to eat. They'll have to think about heat or eat. This transformation that's in front of us is real business for each one of you who sit in this pristine environment, or someone who's not as fortunate to live in places you live, and perhaps a little bit more dependent on whether the cost of their fuel allows them to think about rent and food. But let's go back. Propane being cleaner than electricity in 38 states isn't good enough. And that's why we're here today, to begin to introduce this concept about renewable propane. It's one of the things that I like to do, because as we think about the future of electricity and the future of propane and natural gas and nuclear power, as we were talking earlier, one of the things we want to think about is, how do you in fact get to zero? The one way we'll do it, and the way we study, in fact, using renewable propane, we will be cleaner than electricity, even when those states achieve their stated goals. Using renewable propane, sometimes only 1 or 2%, and sometimes 100%, we can be cleaner than the grid in the very narrow metric of climate, greenhouse gases. And that's a critical step. Now, I'll tell you, I spend most of my day thinking beyond the fuel and thinking about the appliances that use the fuel. And I can tell you, if you're a customer of Procter Gas, we're working every day to think about the next generation of water heater, or the next generation of generator, or the next generation of tools that the farm uses. We've just brought out a brand new engine with Cummins Engine Company, a storied diesel company, and yet they see the future of propane, and they'll be having the most efficient technology known to man, really, that Cummins has ever developed. In 2024, this generation of engine will come out. So I'm quick to say we need to innovate. We need to innovate in technology and the applications, the process, the way we deliver the fuel to you, and lastly, the fuel itself. I won't go into great detail because Leslie already has done it, but this renewable propane, and she talked about one form, right? One form today is coming from retreating vegetable oils that are used at McDonald's, or could be certain agricultural sources. We're actually involved in a project right now in Maine where we're thinking about how to take kelp that was grown for carbon removal, and now how we can take that kelp and turn it into renewable propane. That's the kind of thing we're doing every day, and it's exciting. The last thing I'll say is when we want to talk about propane in the future, and most of you probably are propane customers, you live in a place where people understand that and it's important to you, here would be some words we say. One, that clean and renewable energy like propane, clean and renewable propane in fact, accelerates decarbonization. Most people go, how could that be? I believe that the path to a clean climate is just through electrification. That fossil fuels are bad. Let me tell you right now, fossil fuels aren't really good or bad, right? They're not clean or dirty. Coal, oil, and wood's very dirty, right? Electricity produced from coal, oil, or wood, it's pretty dirty. You hope you understand that. Propane and natural gas to a degree, as we're blessed by chemistry in that we don't have any methane. We are a wonderful fuel. We're portable and high energy, and we do things that you folks here need us to do. We power big trucks that don't really get powered very well by electricity. We heat your home when it's really cold. That really can't get done by electricity. We heat your water so you can take a great hot shower at a time when perhaps nothing else would do it. Those are the kind of things we do. So, and we do it all today better than electricity in really 38 of the other states. The other, let's see, 38 and 50 leaves 12. The other 11, we're about the same as electricity. This is in Vermont, is the one place where we are a perfect complement to electricity, and you think about having that wide path. So the other thing we say though is this, and with two politicians to my right, I want to make sure I think about it because it's an area that we really don't talk about enough. Access to clean, affordable, and renewable energy. I'm going to stop right there for a second. I've just mentioned two really important words. Access. No, these solutions help no one if you can't use it, right? And we talk about electricity on a worldwide scale. People don't realize 2 billion people in the world don't even have access to electricity. 2 billion people don't even have access to electricity. Another billion don't have access to reliable electricity, right? Access is everything. The access to clean, affordable. Now let me just stop for a second. How rude of me to talk about affordable for a second. If you can afford the solutions, they're useless as well, right? And as we look to the future, clearly we see energy could become more expensive in a lot of these other forms we talk about. We really maintain our effort to make sure that the solutions that involve propane, you can afford them. You can afford the devices that burn them, and you can afford the fuel itself. One of the beauties of renewable propane is we have chosen feedstocks that in fact are affordable, plentiful, easily converted. So I'm going to back up. Access to clean, affordable, and renewable energy like propane provides equity on the path to zero emissions. Let me say, as a propane guy, for me to say those words 4 or 5 years ago, I would have said, not one of those words is in my vocabulary. Not one of those words I'm going to use. Access to clean, affordable, and renewable energy provides equity on the path to zero emissions? How crazy a statement is that? So let me finish with this. We would say the energy transformation that's in front of us now and is beginning to unfold in front of you, and we're beginning to see parts of that as diesel goes to $6 a gallon and gasoline goes to $5 a gallon. No matter what anybody says, I think people in this business saw that event unfolding long before Russia and Ukraine happened, right? Path to equity. We believe this transformation could cost as much in the U.S. as $25 trillion. That number is probably understated today. $25 trillion. And when we first said that, I thought that is a preposterous number no matter how much we study it. Then Bank of America finally comes out and says, well, worldwide, we believe this transition is going to be $150 trillion. So tonight, go home if you want. You look up yourself the difference between a billion and a trillion, because it's a lot. And I'm quick to say none of us understand that number. But let me just back up for a second. Suppose we provided a solution in front of you today that actually improved your climate faster today, had a path to zero or below zero tomorrow, had stored energy, right? Don't forget, electricity and natural gas, two predominant forms of energy, are both just in time. You have to have a wire connected to your house. You have to have a pipe connected to your house. There's only really two ways to store energy. One is in a tank. We do it pretty well. You want to be stored for a day, a week, a month, a year, a decade. You can make that choice. And then batteries. Batteries tend to measure their storage in terms of amps and hours or amps and minutes, right? So stored energy is going to become really important as we think to the future, because it's pretty likely that your source of energy won't be exactly consistent as we've known it for the last 50 years. But lastly, equity. Suppose we could redirect in the U.S. $25 trillion of investment. Suppose we could not spend it on climate, but in fact we could redirect it to things that matter to us today. Bridges, highways, police, school, medicine, housing, education, right? That to me is the true definition of equity. So I want you to just think about everything I just said, and then I come bring it all back home into Vermont. You are normal people, you live in a beautiful place, and you think normal thoughts. I'm always happy to be where people are normal, thinking normal thoughts, because it's not always where I am. But I do want you to realize, one, how good Judy and her team at Procter Gas are, and that you're blessed to have somebody like that. But I also want you to begin to think about the choices you make towards a cleaner climate, towards your own health, and towards a better world for everyone to live in. Not just the world you live in, but the world those that are less fortunate than you also live in. I'll be here for the rest of the afternoon and love to talk with you if you have any questions for me. But thank you, and I'm really glad to be here because you're celebrating what I think is maybe the 4th time in the country we really begin to talk to local communities about the role of renewable propane as we really move to the path to zero emissions. Thank you.
What do you think? Was that worth coming out to hear?
Yes.
I'm going to add one quick thing, if you'll indulge me, to the agenda. We have our chairman of the New England Propane Association here as well. He was kind enough to bring up that lovely red convertible that I think we all would like to take a ride in.
Isn't that the drawing prize?
Yeah, I don't think so. So I'm going to give him a moment, and then we also have 2 candidates running for U.S. House and U.S. Senate, and I'd love to give them 5 minutes if you'd be willing to let them do that. Is that all right? Yeah. Okay. Jim Blake is our chairman and the owner of that truck, and you know, anybody wants to hog tie him and take the truck.
Thank you. And I'd like to say Judy is the co-chair of the Propane Gas Association of New England. So she's effortless in everything she does. So it's thank you. I want to share a little thought that as everybody's here, we're in the Green Mountain State, and one of the things that makes it beautiful here is the trees. And I want to just share an old adage, which is, don't lose sight of the forest through the trees. So the energy market is the forest. Don't lose sight of where your energy is coming from by looking at windmills, solar panels, electric lines across the state. It takes many trees to make a forest, and our energy, renewable propane, along with other items and technology that's coming, are all part of that mix. And they're all needed. We all need them. Nobody wants to go for a walk and look at just pine trees. That's boring, right? And it doesn't give us what we need. A pine tree doesn't give you the same heat as an oak tree. And that's why we need to have more trees in our forests to make up the energy market. And with that, you don't need to listen to me. So thank you all for being here today.